Incredible visuals there coming to you from the Wits University protests over the past few days. That student protest really a stark reminder of the 2015 Fees Must Fall movement, when students demanded the decolonisation of the education system. They also demanded free education. They also, as part of their demands back in 2015, demanded the insourcing of general workers at institutions of higher learning. Now, this led to, if you'll remember, former President Jacob Zuma calling for free higher education. The Fees Must Fall movement was later lauded for casting the spotlight on the funding crisis in the sector. So what has changed between 2015 and 2021? Professor Siphamandla Zondi joins us now. He's from the South African Association of Political Studies to unpack the story. Prof, good morning. Thanks very much for your time this morning. What incredible scenes coming from the Wits protests over the past few days. So disturbing, the police response to the students as they took to the streets. But Prof, I want you to just perhaps give us all a bit of a history lesson. We talk about these protests reminding us of the 2015 Fees Must Fall movement, but in fact, it goes back much further than that.
Yes, it is. The student protest has been a feature of the South African higher education landscape going back even to 1994. Almost every year we were confronted with protests at the beginning of the year, and protests quite often towards the end of the year, just before exams. And often the issues are the same. On the surface, the issues relate to fees and the management of student debt, and they're often related to student accessing the education they see as absolutely critical for them to change their lives. And they often relate to how institutions of higher learning and government prepare for that every year. But at a fundamental level, this has also been asking huge questions of the sector since 1994 about what it means to be a higher education institution in a society that is battling with the apartheid and colonial legacies, and what does it mean to offer education to a politically conscious youth that are ambitious about a better world and about changing the world and changing society. And often because of corporatization, because we haven't quite transformed many of these institutions in the sector, and our society in South Africa, we find that we are unable to deal with this. And of course, in that process will always come the strong arm of the state, the inability of the post-apartheid police to deal with an angry black youth, and using leader force in order to do that, and often leads to some or the other tragedy, such as the tragedy yesterday. So it's nothing new. It's been happening over a period of time. We just are not finding solution. We're not exercising the leadership we need in order to avoid these things and even to anticipate them before they take place.
Let's talk about that, about anticipating these kinds of protests before they take place. And we often talk about learning lessons, in this case, learning lessons from the 2015 Fees Must Fall movement. Now, back then, those protests were also triggered by an announcement at the time by government that fees would be hiked. This time around, these protests were preceded by Bladen Zamande, the minister in the Department of Higher Education, announcing that government has no money to pay for new students through NSFAS. That announcement being made also before any consultation with students themselves.
You are correct there. The 2015-2016 protests were preceded by an announcement, I think around December, an announcement by the Minister of Higher Education and by government that there would be fee increases. That happened, it seemed, without prior consultation with the student population generally. And that led to an explosion. The authorities in the university institutions themselves, or in the broader higher education sector generally, seemed to simply follow along with an announcement without anticipating that this would not sit well with students, it would lead to some explosion. It seems we have not learned that, because the government would have known what our fiscal situation is going to be in October last year. What did it do to engage all the student formations, all the student structures, to prepare them for the announcement that the minister then makes a week or so ago, so that you avoid these things, you manage them through negotiation and leadership and consultation, rather than wait for them, make an announcement and then it explodes into a protest and then you negotiate. So kind of like the wrong way around in the order. But that is what has been a problem for a long period of time. Make an announcement, and you assume that the students are not just going to take it as it is, they've not been consulted, and then they have to protest, and then you have to negotiate. It's just, we need a better management of this, because we can always anticipate it. As I said, every beginning of the year, there is this issue. What have we done differently to make sure that we manage it beforehand, so that when it explodes because we have managed it, not it explodes because we have not managed it. Again, it talks to that elitist culture, the culture of simply imposing decisions, the culture of a very superficial consultation, and lack of understanding and empathy that I kind of find in sometimes in our leadership. It's lessons that we must learn, but we really have to learn these lessons and really try and manage the situation beforehand, because it's always predictable.
Yeah, I mean, it's madness, isn't it? Because we're doing the same things over and over again, and we're expecting a different outcome. It's the definition of madness. And you talk about, you know, the lack of understanding, the lack of empathy, not only in how government responds, but certainly how police respond to students who are protesting for an education effectively. I mean, the police minister will come out and say, as he has already done, that there is no difference between how police respond to protests involving white South Africans and protests involving black South Africans. In fact, we're speaking to the police minister a little later on today on the channel. But the police's response, Prof, please talk to us about that, given what you've seen unfolding over the past few days, particularly yesterday with the death of that 35-year-old man.
Yeah, it talks to the deep-seated challenges of us trying to decolonize the state, decolonize the society, decolonize the institutions, decolonize the security forces and all of that. Because indeed, even yesterday, if we had just a single white man to stand in the front of the protest to plead for calm, there would have been a calm from the police side. So they know how to restrain themselves. I remember it very well when Father Phillips from the Holy Trinity Church in Brampton again, where the Casper from the police was charging against a group of students. They were running away. And then this priest stood up there in white long robe and went like this. Literally, the police came in, came close, and then they stopped. And then they almost like apologized and moved away. So this state can empathize with whiteness. It can, and we saw it. We've seen it many times. We saw it also even during the Peace Must Fall protest, that when the white students were put at the front and all that, the police were more calmer and more civil in their responses and all of that. But when it is just black students on their own, it's really a hunter and a prey kind of situation. It's really sad, but it speaks to some deep-seated things we never overcame. Part of the reason why South Africa is not fully decolonized is the fact that we dealt with the material, we're dealing with the material things, but not dealing with the immaterial element of the colonial order that we inculcated. And as we've seen all over the continent, those who take over from a colonial force tend to replicate the behaviors and the conduct of the colonial, even unknowingly, because that is what is called a neo-colonial legacy that gets left behind. And that's something we need to confront, and confront very carefully, because we do tend to behave like a colonial or an apartheid government or an apartheid police force or an apartheid authority in a university or other places. We have to undo that culture, but it's not going to get us anywhere. With huge inequalities, with large numbers of students who come from poor backgrounds, really fighting to get their fair chance, we're going to have a confrontation. We have to change our way we do it and try and bring in empathy, bring in more dialogue, and bring in all other sectors of society to assist us ahead of January, February, March protests that are always going to happen if we are going to manage. We really have to manage it.
Wow. Devastating analysis from you there. Professor Siphamandla Zondi, thanks very much for your time this morning on the AM Report. He's from the South African Association of Political Studies as we continue to unpack the Wits University student protests, particularly in the wake of a 35-year-old man being shot dead by, allegedly, police during those protests just yesterday. Once again, we'll be speaking to Police Minister Behikele a little later on, right here on the channel.